From speed bridging with gravity blocks to landing a lethal fall without taking any fall damage, we're going to be counting down the most challenging skills to pull off in Minecraft, from difficult to downright impossible, beginning with what we'll call the rail cannon. This is the deadliest cannon in Minecraft, and here's how to survive it. Since even though it's true that this design by Fallen Breath can kill the Ender Dragon in one shot, if we equip ourselves with Projectile Protection 4 Netherite armor, a potion of the Turtle Master, and an enchanted golden apple, then it's also true that we can survive a hit from this thing. And we did it all without a totem, which to me seems a bit more impressive. But it's also true that the impossible part of this skill is getting all the materials necessary to do it. After all, it's not hard to stand still. And a much more difficult way of making yourself immortal is to do this trick to breathe underwater. Now, when you watch this glitch happen in first person, it might be hard to understand what's happening. But when we cut to a third person view, it gets a little bit more obvious. What's happening here is that the client and the server are desyncing every time we punch this fish. So while the client thinks that nothing changed and we can keep swimming as normal, according to the server, that punching cancels the sprint and we stand up so that we can breathe above the air. And that little bit of desync will keep our head above water. But that trick works best on a server, whereas this one could work just as well on the client. With just an ender pearl and some precision, we can manage to walk through solid walls. To pull this off, we need to line up our ender pearl throw right at the bottom edge of the block. And once we do that, we sprint through, and after about 1 second, we come up the other side, giving us a great way to hide our secret base, or just to run away from your friends during a manhunt. But apparently, we're not the only ones that can go through walls. And if you want to get more complicated, it's also possible to shoot an arrow through a wall like this. As Doc M shows off, if you place an enderman inside of a boat and then position that next to a wall, then when you shoot an arrow at it, that arrow will have a chance to pass through the wall. And the reason for this is because once the arrow hits the enderman, it ignores all other collision events for 1 tick after hitting it. Or kind of hitting it. After all, an arrow can't hit an enderman, and apparently it can't hit this wall either. So if we take a target block behind this wall, we could also get ourselves a secret button for a secret entrance. And it's a pretty good secret too. Not many people go around shooting endermen. It usually doesn't work out so well. And what also never works out so well is mining this center block in a desert pyramid. But if we grab this cobweb, we can take after this user and actually pull off the perfect temple heist. All you have to do is when you mine into the treasure chamber, place this cobweb, and then slowly but surely loot all the chests before you hit that pressure plate. But hit that pressure plate we never will, because if we throw this ender pearl right before we open the last chest, we can launch ourselves right back out to the surface, leaving both us and the treasure chest intact. But that's not the last time we'll be using ender pearls, because over here, we can take after Simply Sark and do this impossible feat of crossing the end void gaps. We're just gonna need a few items to do it. And if you equip yourself the slow falling potion and an ender pearl like so, we can use a simple water launcher to blast off with a Riptide Trident, and then use all of that speed momentum to launch the ender pearl over the end void gap. And keep in mind, the islands in the end are roughly 225 blocks apart. And if we went any further, the ender pearl would be thrown far enough where it would unload if the player goes back to the starting island. So I'd say this is about as close to the maximum distance you can get out of one of these things. And it's a lot more impressive than just traveling the end in another elytra. Speaking of another elytra, to do this trick properly, we're gonna need 2 of them. Because once that first elytra breaks midair, the real skill here is being able to switch out into another elytra before you hit the ground. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, this requires a very quick reaction time. But when you pull it off, it feels just as cool. And believe me, for as simple as this one sounds, it's not simple to pull off. And not to mention that by practicing it, you're putting yourself within seconds of death on the spot. And while we're talking about dying on the spot, this would be a good time to mention the anvil. Ask Rekrap, it's not easy to kill someone with an anvil, and to kill a moving target with one is even more impossible. Not only do players move around much faster, but they also move around sporadically. So being able to plan out the proper trajectory to drop one of these on your foe, it's easier said than done. And the most important detail is that you really only get 1 shot to pull this off, because as soon as they notice an anvil dropping from the sky, they're gonna be a little suspicious. So if you want to be the safest with this, you should at least pre-break your anvil so that they destroy on the spot. Otherwise, that's 32 ingots worth of evidence that you're just leaving out there for them to see. But that's not even the hardest thing to aim, because if you really want a challenge, you should try to kill your friend with a dripstone. Though, not like this, but rather, by using a fishing rod, we're able to grab a falling dripstone entity and then launch it towards our friends. Which I'll mention is easy to do, but it's definitely hard to aim to get the kill. And unlike the anvil, we not only have to worry about where the player's position's gonna be, but also the timing of when we reel in the dripstone. And when you're balancing that many things at once, it's pretty tough to pull off. And honestly, our best bet's to do like this user does and try and launch it towards someone who's on a lower pillar. That way they've at least got a stationary position. Is it easy? No, but a little more possible, and that's what I'll take. But even harder than trying to get that kill is trying not to get killed yourself when you're mining with a wither. Now you might have seen in the past different people try to use withers to help them strip mine down in the deep slate. But what's even more difficult is trying to use a wither to help you mine for ancient debris. Now granted, they're not going to blow up the ancient debris, but with how low of a blast resistance that Netherrack has, you're opening yourself up to a lot of trouble when you fight one of these things. And to be able to do this long enough where you're actually able to get some ancient debris, that's impressive. Because in our testing, it was hard to last more than a few seconds without dying to this thing, let alone long enough to get yourself a full netherite beacon. But even if you were able to pull this off and get all of the ancient debris you need, that still wouldn't be as hard as trying to cross a lava lake by just using boats. And folks, it only takes one look at Dream's manhunt to see just how impressive this is. Not only do you have to be precise in your timing to land all of these jumps, you also gotta time it just right where you're jumping off of the boats before they disintegrate in the lava. And the two of those together, it's a risky business. For one, you can only hold 9 boats in your hotbar to pull this off, so even if you're able to do it, you're not able to do it for long. So make sure you get to your destination soon enough to dismount. But if that jump is difficult because of how dangerous it is, this one's even more difficult just because of how stupid it is to pull off. While it is entirely true that if you spam jump quick enough, you could use that to propel yourself with an elytra, the trouble then comes in depending on what server you're running on. So if you're trying this on your friend's laggy server that's a continent away, it's gonna be a lot easier than it is to do on your single player client. But once you nail the timing, this is a way to fly around without the use of things like rockets or tridents. And while you might consistently learn how to pull off a jump or two, the difficult part's learning how to master this in a couple of different trials. Especially when most of the time, whether it works or not comes down to a random factor. And that's not the only skill we need server lag to do. Because to pull off the impossible feat of speed bridging with gravity blocks, we're gonna need a lot of lag. And probably a macro too. In this example, we're using the carpet mod to simulate lag in the map. And you'll notice that the better that you are at bridging, overall the less lag that you'll need. And really to pull off this trick without using any lag, you would have to move at a speed faster than what's possible in survival mode. Which is impressive for sure, but it kinda defeats the point. And that's not the last time you're gonna have to worry about your speed, because if you go too fast trying this elytra trick, it's not gonna end so well for you or the mobs. And truly, trying to carry another mob by using an elytra in a lead is almost guaranteed to end with one of the leads snapping and a pile of mob drops on the floor below. But it's also incredibly useful if you need to move mobs far distances, especially without the use of a nether portal. So if you want to pull this off with the best odds that you have, you'll want to look out for a cliff or a body of water so that you can gradually increase the speed, and then you can use a rocket to avoid the lead snapping. Oh, and also make sure that you got a body of water that you can land in on the other end. Otherwise, you'll have brought that naturally generated pink sheep all this way just for it to end up as pink wool on the other end. But even if water's able to save us here, it's not going to do so much with this next skill. Because if you were to find yourself falling into the end void, the water isn't going to move fast enough for your friend to drop a water bucket for you. But if you got the skill, it is possible, but definitely difficult, to save yourself from falling by throwing an ender pearl. But not only does the timing on this have to be precise, but the angle does too. So maybe take up a course in trigonometry before you try this. Oh, and also make sure that you have plenty of health before you try it too. Because nothing's going to be more pathetic than landing that ender pearl clutch, only to take the 2.5 hearts worth of fall damage and die there on the spot. And if you don't want to worry about fall damage at all, then you should try this glitch. As you can see from this user, if we were to sprint jump and then keep holding jump on the way down for our fall, then it's possible to save ourselves from all fall damage if we hit crouch right before hitting the ground, which is a random set of steps and they're easier said than done. But if you pull it off right, you can survive a fall from any height without ever having to touch a water bucket. Though keep in mind, if you're going to try this, only do it on 1.19.2, since the glitch seems to have been shadow patched in 1.19.3. But if you still want to impress your friends on the latest release, then grab yourself a couple of gravity blocks. Since with some incredibly precise timing, we're able to use gravity blocks placed underneath us to jump across this gap while hugging onto the wall. But obviously, since we're using gravity blocks here, we're not the only ones falling, so you have to be able to jump on the gravity block before it falls. And if you want to be even more impressive here, then the real secret's to try and use this trick to go up in elevation, or even just stay at the same Y level. Really, as long as you're not falling into the pit, you're doing it right in my eyes. And while that skill's a pain to try and jump further, this one uses pain to try and jump higher. Since if you're willing to take a beating, it is possible to use damage knockback to jump higher. And while it's much easier to try and use this to get an extra half a block to your jump, if you're going for the goalpost, then the one that you really got to use is the 2-block jump. So how do we even do this? Well, it's going to be easiest to pull off with fire, since when you light yourself ablaze, you're getting constant damage ticks that we can use here. But worth noting is that you don't have to place the fire ahead of time, since by just carrying around a flint and steel and then lighting a fire mid-jump, you'll get the same effect, which is good. Now you don't have to worry about the fire, it's just an impossible timing, which maybe isn't a relief, but it's at least only one thing to worry about. And even though fire makes this skill feel pretty painful, unfortunately this one with a water bucket isn't any easier. Now, from a glance, this looks like it should be pretty easy to pull off, right? There's the standard water bucket clutch, but the real sticking point here is that the floor is made up of blocks that we are able to waterlog. So even if we nail the timing just like we usually would, we're just gonna waterlog the block and die on impact. So the way that you get around this is that you have to place down a regular block first and then water on top of that, which sounds simple, but it's extremely extremely difficult to do while falling. And the way that you know this one's tough is that even if you have a right-click macro, this is still almost impossible to do in survival. And especially if you were to try to do something like this in actual practice, I'm not sure many of us would be able to do this with the proper setup, let alone without it. While this water bucket challenge makes it easy to kill ourselves, this next one proves that it's even tougher to kill other people. Once you get a rainstorm overhead, if you equip yourself with a Riptide 3 Trident and Elytra, we're able to pull off the coolest trick shot in history. But watch closely, because if you blink, you might miss it. Since once we get a rainstorm overhead, we're able to use this setup to get ourselves launching at over 400 blocks per second. And at that point, it's difficult to land anything, let alone a headshot. But once you do, you'll notice that this is able to one-shot someone with Protection 4 Netherite armor. And in our testing, we found that if they're wearing Projectile Protection 4, this will still get them down to 1 heart. And who knows, with more precise timings, there's still a chance that we could get this in one shot. And that way, we basically turn ourselves into a flying version of the rail cannon. And while the bow shot's tough because of how unpredictable players are, you'll find this jump is tough just because of how unpredictable the game is. As User Legitimus shows off, with the right setup, we're able to use this glitch with a slime block to essentially bounce higher than where we started from. And the key here comes down to the client-server desync, because while one of them thinks we hit the ground, the other one thinks we bounce. And the result is that we get launched super high. And while some setups of this trick can make it easier to do, others like this one require a great deal of precision. And with any of them, you're gonna find that it's hard to do consistently on the fly, especially when there's these times where you think you made a jump because of how high you get launched, but it turns out it still wasn't high enough. Making parkour with these, some of the hardest I've ever had to do. But it's still not the hardest jump for parkour. No, because that award has to go to this jump. And while this user makes it look easy, the truth is not as simple as that. And the way that it works is that if you turn exactly 45 degrees midair, that'll allow you to move around 2% faster. Sounds small, right? But in examples like this, that could be all you need to make the jump. Since while a normal walking speed would be 4.317 blocks per second, when you're strafe walking, that goes up to 4.405 blocks per second. And just by that small margin, we're able to make this jump that we couldn't otherwise. And to even try this, first you're going to need to jump, sprint, and hold forward at the exact same time. And then you'll hold that right up until the last jump, where you then only have a short amount of time to start strafing back and forth. But that alone isn't enough, since to really pull this off, you have to look as close to 45 degrees to the side as possible. And when you put all that together, you get the hardest jump that we've been able to do in this video. But wait, there's still one more, because this trick is so impossible that you literally have to use a tool-assisted speedrun software to make it happen. And as you'll see from this video from Cinemal, to pull this off, we first have to position ourselves at the edge of the block, and then continue sliding back and forth on it, all the while placing flint and steel, until we're eventually able to pull off this skill to be able to pillar up 50% faster. And the reason this all happens is because when the player jumps on the edge of a block, it'll cause the internal server of the single player to think that the player hasn't jumped at all. So when you take damage in this state, things get a little weird. And to be able to set up a task to even do this is tough enough. So if you're able to do this skill by yourself, take this crown, you deserve it. And with that, folks, YouTube thinks that you might like this video, so see if they're right and have a good one, alright?